Hi, everyone. This is Tom Parmalee, the founder of funeralvision.com. And today I'm joined by someone who really needs no introduction, Jake Johnson, the president and CEO of Johnson Consulting Group. Thanks so much for joining me, Jake.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.
First, why don't you tell us what's new at Johnson Consulting Group? Are there any new particular services or offerings that you want to give the profession a heads up on?
Yeah, no, it's been a busy year. Of course, what everybody knows is for our mergers and acquisitions business that we do, but we've excelled well in our business consulting. So we have leadership conferences. In fact, we have one this week here, as well as our customer experience CX workshops that we do. Those are some new ones that have been a good uptake and very needed in this profession with the way cremation rate is and payroll. How do we tackle some of these things? So.
Great, that's exciting to hear. Seems like you're always doing something interesting.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, you announced, who I thought was a simply amazing hire, who most of us in the profession know, Jim Price, who joined your team as President of Industry Relations. Why don't you share with us, what Jim's doing at Johnson Consulting, how he's fitting in with the team, and just how he's been an asset to your company so far.
Yep. So I've known Jim since I was 12. And so Jim may have known me more than I known him until I finally got to get to know him. But it's just humbling to have Jim at Johnson Consulting. Jim is somebody who I worked for as a teenager and then worked for and with a Keystone Group. So Jim, with all of his contacts and experience in the profession, also he's just his caring and his wanting to give back to the profession was just something I really wanted to be a part of Johnson Consulting. And so that's very much what he does. I mean, he's out there, you'll see him a lot at conferences and in and out of our profession with some of the outside profession things about children's grieving, things like that. So it's really cool what he does. And I think he's obviously a lifer in funeral service and he enjoys what he does. So, hopefully he sticks around for a long time.
I'm glad you mentioned all of the things he does just, in support of the profession. That's something you're very passionate about yourself. I know you have the Golf Classic, which I believe you renamed in honor of your father. Why don't you share a little bit about the Golf Classic and just, just how much it's done for the profession throughout the years? I think many people would be astounded by how much money you've raised.
Yeah. Well, Dad was always big with taking care of the ownership that had developed the funeral homes that he was a part of at Pierce Brothers back in the day. So, I think that started in the early 80s or somewhere around there and has grown to an attendance of roughly 120 golfers a year. Uh, Dad has turned that into an opportunity to give money back to the profession. So, uh, combined, we're well over, I mean, we're over $1 million in what we've contributed, and we continue to do it. And it's really, it was a great thing when I first attended it to meet the people that attend this event, and to see them all get together, people who can even compete against each other, but be there for a common cause to contribute back to this profession and scholarships, Funeral Service Foundation, ICCFA Educational Foundation. It's really been an honor to be a part of it and take that forward now with Dad's passing. So.
It's amazing. I mean, kudos to you for doing that and continuing to make it grow. Next I'll be very interested to hear your insights on this because the FTC recently had come out and they wanted to ban non-compete agreements, but then we had a court decision, the Northern District of Texas, which came out and they prevented that final rule banning non-competes from taking effect. What are your thoughts about all this? Do you think this battle is over yet? Is this something that we're going to continue to hear squabbling about? From your viewpoint, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting. So, because I kind of see those as two areas. There's the employees and non-competes on employees, and then non-competes on ownership. And the states like California are very they make it very clear on what employee non-competes look like. I don't think they can exist. And you can understand that employee for their own livelihood needs to be able to work, and to restrict them from their area to work, I can get that. However, when you move into the ownership part, it's a little different, especially in the funeral profession. You have people with their names on the sign that have sold that for a great amount of money. And the new owner is expecting that for a good period of time, that person will not just go ahead and compete against them. And it's very, I kind of, I contrast it to what happened when I was involved with my brother in buying a restaurant. And so I think the non-compete agreement on that was 2 years, and it was clear after, quite frankly, after 6 months, there was no use for the former owner was not going to be a threat to us. They had sold the name, they had sold the location, they had sold the menu recipes and everything. It was over. If they wanted to start a new restaurant, it would just be foolish for them to even start one under the same name, because it would probably help us. That's very different for funeral homes. When you look at, like, so I have my funeral home, Menke Funeral Home. George Menke, who recently passed away, but I've known George for a long time, and George knew a lot of people in that community, and he was very capable of, if he wanted to, start a new funeral home under Menke Funeral Home, and it would be very clear which one was the Menke Funeral Home. It'd be the one where he was at, and so it's just different in the funeral space. And I believe that it was just not something that you could get behind and say that's fair for an owner to be able to just compete after selling their business for a lot of money. And when you think about multiples, uh, a multiple really is how many years of cash flow are you expecting as a buyer to get? So, you hear multiples of 6 times, 7 times, whatever. So you're really buying 6 years of cash flow. I mean, essentially that is the formula. And so, for a non-compete to certainly be anything less than that, for sure, we know is that's going to have an impact on value. And that's probably a follow-up question. I can expand on that, but I just think it was very broad to say that non-competes should not be upheld for an owner who sold their business. That's just kind of silly to me.
Yeah, you unpacked a lot of issues there with that response. And I mean, I can tell you, I sort of have mixed feelings myself about non-competes. I was subject to one as an employee, not as an owner, when a business changed hands. And it sort of definitely limited my options, at least for a while. As an owner, where do you stand on the question of non-competes? What are your personal feelings weighing all those issues and whatnot?
hmm the ownership in a funeral business, it's such a personal business. You have these owners that are mayoral status within their communities, and they typically stick around, right? And so, I've heard stories, and they absolutely exist. I could actually find the case studies that exist, but where even after 10 years, an owner starts up, and they cause issues with that business that is still has the owner's name on it. There is just so much personal, experience associated with the individual who's there, and it's just a very difficult thing to think that funeral home owners wouldn't be tied to a non-compete agreement. Now, it should be within a reasonable range and realm, and quite frankly, the when I got into the business in the mid '90s, part of the purchase price was associated with a non-compete payment over time, and that was really to compensate them for not competing, if you will, and that there would be a financial sting to it. And you see more of that where there's more cash up front, although there's some still deferred over time with some buyers out there. And so the big thing is, if we all want, I'll summarize it this way: if we all want the multiples we're getting for selling funeral homes, which are nice multiples, then we should expect that we can't compete against these people that are buying them. If we want to be able to compete against these buyers within, like the restaurant, 2 years, expect there to be a much less purchase price on it, or no interest at all, quite frankly, or people will change their mindset and just start competing against you in different ways. But under the current model of keeping the name and taking care of that owner, and looking for their opinion on things, which was more how my dad operated, then they can't compete against you. And if they're going to, it's really going to change the dynamics and how we make offers on businesses going forward.
The question that sort of pops into my mind is I wonder if all of this public argument over non-competes, if the FTC has caused some confusion about it all now, and if we might not see moving forward, regardless of whether or not they're legal or not, if we might see more people break the non-competes, thinking that, maybe they'll be hard to enforce, and there's some confusion about all of this. Does that worry you that, as you being someone involved in this process, handling it for others and serving as an advisor and whatnot, that we'll see more people just breaking the non-competes? And if that happens, what are the penalties? What are the recourse? And what sort of tips do you have to prevent that kind of thing?
hmm Well, I think certainly on the employee, if they come back, if the FTC comes back, I think their focus should be more on the employee side of things. Uh, on the business side of things, it's really part of what you're buying. There's not only the goodwill, but what I would call the personal goodwill of that business that you're acquiring. And so especially within a funeral business, there's so much goodwill on it. The restaurant purchase was like 4x the EBITDA, and funeral homes are much more than that. So the the having that non-compete in place is important. I don't think owners, if somebody's finally gotten to the point where they're selling, I don't think their intent is to go back into business. Now, what can happen is that I think all owners should be considering is, there's always the allure of the purchase price that you might have, that it makes your life easier. But have you really thought about what you're going to do after you sell? And because I think the ones that go back into business are the ones that realize they probably weren't ready to sell or shouldn't have, but they sold, and now they're wishing they were still involved, and the owner doesn't, the buyer is moved on with how they're running the business. And so I think it starts with the ownership, especially right now as we look into in the next 5 years, a lot of succession planning, really to start with, you got to start with the end in mind, and so you get the money. So now what? Well, you're going to owe taxes on it. And then now you're going to have to live off it. And it's generally not all that healthy to just completely say you're not going to do anything, and so what do you want to do? And so we do see more owners staying involved as consultants and helping the new owner out, new buyer. Um, but if they're going to get to a point where they want to break a non-compete and start a new business, the grass always seems greener on the other side, but you've probably sold, if you were sold a good business, it's probably one that's been around for quite some time. And so now you got to invest in real estate, and you've got to go back out in the community. And there was a reason you sold in the first place. And so, on top of the fact that you've now probably entered yourself into, if you're breaking a non-compete, a lawsuit, and dealing with that. So it really, to avoid all that, it really starts with just making sure that when you're ready to sell, that you understand what that means, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think we've both been around for a little while, and I know we all know owners who probably sold and they probably just needed like a 3-month vacation,
Right,
because they
right.
miss it. They want to get back to it, and they just needed a little bit of a break. But then they miss it and they want to get back in. Um,
Yep.
while I got you here, I have to ask you about this huge news that we heard recently about Park Lawn going private. And
hmm
what was more interesting was that Homesteaders is a strategic investor in that, and
hmm
it caught a lot of people by surprise. I mean, they kept the lid on that pretty well. I don't think anyone caught wind of what was going on there. So, what do you think this means for the profession, for the landscape of funeral service? Just share your insights on this.
Right. Well, first, so Steve Schaefer at Homesteaders, I met Steve so long ago when my dad, and he was hired at my dad's company, and I've just always admired Steve. And when I worked for him at Keystone Group, when he worked at my dad's company, and what he's done with Homesteaders, so it's pretty cool. And he's a smart guy. And Brad Green and his team, I mean, those guys have done a great job as well at Parkland. I think when we think about being earmarked or being labeled as a publicly traded company or being a private company. There's definitely some allure in the conversation when we're talking to people we want to acquire or buy or bring on to our company, that we're private and we control our destiny more rather than the ups and downs of a public, the public environment, the stock market. So I really commend Brad and his team for, aligning with somebody like Steve Schaefer to really bring it private, bring it back into a group that understands funeral service and what it is and what it is not. It's not a Nvidia company. It's these are funeral homes and they have ups and downs, and you need to have an investor that understands that. So I think that's good for Park Lawn, and to get out of that public environment. So.
Well, Jake, you just shared such an array of insights. I really appreciate you making time to do this. Do you have any any final thoughts or any topics that you want to touch on before we end this?
Yeah, going back to the covenant not to compete, it'll be interesting to see when it comes back how it's revisited. My assumption it'll be focused on the pay, the individual employees. I think it got blurred and got all included, and that didn't work. So they have to go back and really understand where is the issue. But when I think about my father's generation and a generation before him, and then my generation as we went in. I'm guessing every generation, when they got to about our age, they're like, "Oh my God, how is this going to work with this next generation? They don't work as hard, they don't this and that, and whatever." And but they always seem to figure it out. And so I'm saying this because when we go to like when is the right time to transfer to sell, right? I think that there is a part of the ownership out there is of that generation. They feel like they need to do everything, and if they don't, something's going to get missed, or there's nobody that can do it as good as them. And the problem with that is they're right. The good news is they're right also, and so I think this next generation, what we're seeing is their ability and comfortableness with outsourcing things and finding people to help them. And so for that, they're able to find more balance in their life, even though we never thought it would exist, right? In funeral service of all things. So I think that's, to look at that and understand when the right time is for succession planning, because there's a lot of that that's going to be occurring, is important, because, and if you do that right, then these non-competes won't be, they'll be rewarding to you as being compensated for not competing rather than feeling like you made a mistake and how can I get out of this, as an owner, that is.
Well, Jake, thanks again so much for sharing your insights and really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you.
Likewise.